And so now, without further ado, I will turn this over to Lee. Quick overview of our agenda. We're going to do the CARES Act, FAA modernization, and all the changes that are coming down the pike. They are numerous and profound, for lack of a better word. So we'll go through all of that and then hit digital signatures, which are already a part of the system, but also going to be implemented in the new changes with the FAA. And we'll open up to questions. We'll kind of try to take questions as we go. So that's, again, where you put it in the Q&A section. Ask your questions there. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lee, our moderator, and who will guide us through all this. And Lee, take it from there.
Thanks, Tracy. Welcome, everybody. As Tracy said, I have to say, as we were working together to put this presentation together, there's quite a few things in the works and coming down the line that I think a lot of people may find they were not aware of. And so without taking too much time, just quickly, the panelists we've got from our sort of escrow and registry side, we have Scott McCreary from McAfee and Taft and Bruce Marshall from AIC Title Service. From the legal side, in terms of transactions, we have Ed Kammerer with Greenberg and Trowery. And then from the bank side of this, we have Terry Pinchon from PNC Bank. So we can jump right in. What we're going to start out with, again, is talking about the FAA, Reauthorization Act, how this all, came about, the different aspects of the GAO report. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you to get things going.
Okay, well, this is Bruce, and good morning, everybody. Pleased to be part of this presentation today. One of the things about the CARES Act, and that's the Civil Aviation Registry Electronic Services. And this is an initiative that evolved out of the FAA's Reauthorization Act in 2018. At that time, as part of their funding for the FAA was mandated to do some upgrades and improvements and modernization of their system within a 3-year period. And some of the things that they were tasked to cover were to take all of the information presently in the FAA's files and records and digitize that information, and then work on their processes, all their paper handling processes, and turn those into digital online processes. They were asked to implement systems that would allow the public to reach in and be able to file and submit information and conduct their transactions electronically, as well as they were tasked with coming up with systems that would allow more efficient, broader access to the registry. Finally, one of the mandates was that within this 3-year period is that you come up with a process for surcharging those persons that continue to use paper transactions. So it was sort of it wasn't just if you build it, they'll come. It was more of, if you build it, you better incentivize people in a way to use the new system. There are a couple other things that came out of that, and that would be on the next slide. If we can move to the next slide. That the FAA was also mandated within 180 days to change the re-registration time for non-commercial general aviation aircraft to 7 years. And we had some discussion on our panel about this, and I think, Scott, you had some viewpoints on this. Perhaps you could share those with our members.
Sure, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I think this is a change that's not implemented yet, but will be, and it would be a rather significant change. I think the idea behind the change is that pushing out the registration renewal from 3 years to 7 years for this group of aircraft would cut down on the administrative work that the FAA has to do, right? And as they process documents, and they're overworked and understaffed right now as it is. But it's interesting because we don't know what non-commercial general aviation aircraft will be. We don't know what aircraft will fall within that realm. And, the idea that aircraft, applicants for registration or aircraft registered owners don't have to update their information as much, in a way goes contrary to the direction that the whole CARES program is going, which is, more information more often and more detailed information. So it'll be nice not to have to re-register, all of our, corporate general aviation aircraft every 3 years, but there are a lot of things that need to happen so we know how that's going to work.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Scott. I think one of the things that happened is that when they came up with the original 3-year renewal program, it was so that they could better track what was happening with aircraft in the system. The FAA themselves didn't know whether aircraft had moved on to their next life being repurposed as Budweiser cans, or perhaps what would happen to some of these aircraft that were either scrapped or perhaps ownership had changed, because you can change ownership of an aircraft through changing ownership of the entity that owns the aircraft without something actually being registered on the FAA and the FAA ever having any knowledge who's actually operating and controlling these aircraft. So I think that there is some argument that's a little counterintuitive, but obviously I think it'll make it easier for people not to have to follow those strict guidelines of redoing things every 3 years and risk having your registrations canceled and not being able to operate your aircraft. The other thing that came out of that is that they designated certain employees of the registry, or asked the registry to designate people that would be exempted if there was a government shutdown on funding. Which I think was a good idea. And I think the FAA did a pretty good job of this the last time around. One thing they did overlook was that the folks that were maintaining their computer systems, some of them were in Kansas City. And when the systems broke down, it created somewhat of an emergency. But I think it got solved very quickly, and it really didn't amount to as big a deal as we thought it might be at the time. If we could move on to the next slide. So the FAA came out with their CARES program, the Registry Modernization Program, and had their vision of what it was going to be in response to the reauthorization that happened in 2018. But then there were some events that I think really significantly impacted and changed the direction, and perhaps changed significantly the FAA's vision of what CARES was going to be all about. And the first of these was a report that was, or an audit that was conducted by, and a report that was issued by the DOT Office of Inspector General in May of 2019. Now, they actually announced this audit back in April the preceding year. And when they did, it was in response, and I don't know if everyone remembers, there were a bunch of scathing articles that were published in the Boston Globe that talked about some issues with the aircraft being, or the FAA being able to track and keep track of, airman certificates, basically the pilots' licenses to operate the aircraft, that, they were being forged, they were being obtained by copies of these certificates were being obtained by terrorists and used for inappropriate activities, as well as they really attacked in these articles the non-citizen trusts and some of the issues involved with that. So the DOT came out, and this is the first time that I know in our office, we actually experienced anyone actually coming to our office to talk to us. We've never had anyone from the FAA registry here in Oklahoma City come out and talk with us. But the DOT sent this team out, and I think we had 5 to 7 people that came out and visited us with us. And it was really a good experience at that time. We told them our thoughts and opinions on what was transpiring and some of the issues that were there. And really it was nice. And they didn't just spend, a few minutes with us. I think they spent an entire morning, and then they moved on to others in the other law firms and title service companies in Oklahoma City. And I believe, Scott, your firm was part of this, and perhaps you can share your experience with this.
Yeah, certainly. We met with the IG folks, the DOT IG folks, and it was a very detailed several-hour discussion with multiple people, and their certainly very focused on what they were doing. We came away from that meeting, and I think they expressed to us during the meeting that, the initial report that the DOT issued was addressing more of the computer systems, public access, those sorts of things. Their focus was a little more on, homeland security, law enforcement, those types of issues, and how do they have the information available at their fingertips to do their job in that regard. And so, we've been told, obviously, that report is still pending and should come out, but I haven't heard a timeline for it. Have you, Bruce?
No, I haven't either. We still know it's pending and kind of await seeing that if and when it'll come. But the second thing that happened, probably the most significant audit that occurred, I think Congress wasn't accepting the fact that the DOT was conducting basically an internal audit. For people that aren't aware of the fact, the Federal Aviation Administration is actually an agency, a government agency within the DOT. They roll up into the DOT. And so when this audit was being conducted, it was basically an internal audit. And Congress wanted some more accountability, and they wanted to look at this further, and they tasked the GAO, which is the Government Accountability Office. And basically that office's function, or that agency's function, is to go out and look at other government agencies and audit them, and then report back on what they find to Congress. And this audit happened, I'm not even sure exactly what time it started, but the report was issued in March of 2020. Now, if we look at the timeline, which we mentioned before, back when reauthorization happened in 2018, the FAA had 3 years to act on upgrading and modernizing their system. And now, with only about a year and a half left, the General Accountability Office, the GAO, came out with their report in which they made 15 recommendations that the FAA was tasked to accomplish. And according to the GAO, when this happened, the FAA accepted all of these recommendations. So I think the direction of CARES at that point in time made a significant change in terms of where it was going. Couple key things in the GAO report is that they were very critical of the fact that the FAA was accepting self-certification of a lot of the information that they were receiving. So basically, if someone said, I am, or my company qualifies as a US citizen, and we certify that we're eligible to own an aircraft, the FAA would accept that without looking into further, background. Are they truly a US citizen? Are they really eligible to own this aircraft? The second thing was the fact that the FAA was really set up to function where they were looking at whether or not forms were actually completed correctly, and then rejecting forms that weren't doing this. They weren't really looking at the veracity and truth of the information that was being submitted on these forms. And so I think the GAO viewed this as problematic when you're dealing with a lot of what they called opaque structures, non-citizen trusts, voting trust, nominee shareholders, and other types of structures where there really wasn't a lot of transparency in the beneficial ownership. So these are some of the really critical issues that were raised by the GAO. And at this point, perhaps, Scott, you'd like to discuss some of the specific findings and things that came out of that?
Certainly. So as Bruce said, the GAO report had 15 recommendations, and the GAO and the FAA have, when it first came out, we looked at the 15 recommendations. We thought, okay, well, those might be, pie in the sky types of recommendations. We don't know really what's going to happen, but we've heard that, they're going to address all of them, and they plan to address all of them either through, whatever action they're going to take internally, but they think they can satisfy and address a number of these through the technology upgrades. A few of the, highlights, one of the recommendations is that the FAA, collect and record information on individual and legal entities. They provided an out for publicly traded entities. So it's still not entirely clear if you have a publicly traded company, do you just check a box and you don't have to provide any more information, or what will a publicly traded company have to provide, and publicly traded where? There are a number of issues like that for discussion. But they're specifically asking for the FAA to collect individual information on any individual or entity that owns 25% or more of an aircraft. We're not sure exactly whether that means just the applicant or the shareholder or its shareholder, how deeply they'll look for that information. But they're certainly going to ask for more information than they do now. And they're looking for detailed information, date of birth, physical address, driver's license, pilot license, tax ID numbers, those sorts of things they're going to collect. There is also a recommendation that they're going to increase fees. So we don't know for sure how much the fees will be increased, but they're certainly going to increase the fees. And another of the recommendations is that the information that is maintained in the ancillary files, the trust files, probably the power of attorney files, those sorts of things, that information is going to be collected more in an electronic format and, subject to their subsequent verification and review, just kind of like the information on an application for registration. So, what are they going to do with all that information? There were a number of recommendations, specific recommendations about that. And I just kind of would summarize them in that it used to be that we would file applications, trust documents, powers of attorney, whatever. And that information may or may not be in the public record. It might be placed in an ancillary file that's kind of harder to get to, but you didn't really know what the FAA would do with the information. You're just submitting it. But we know now that they've been tasked, they're going to verify it. So information that you submit now, there's going to be a verification process. They're going to analyze it. So they're going to analyze the relationship between different owners of different aircraft and different files, and they'll be running data analytics on that information that they obtain. And they're going to share it with other law enforcement agencies. And so, people just need that. We don't know exactly how quickly that's going to happen, but it's certainly going to be something that it's going to happen. And the industry will need to get their mind around and understand when you submit information to the FAA, that's what's going to happen with it. Another thing that a specific recommendation was that the FAA follow up on the information submitted in declarations of international operation. So as you all know, probably if you're going to fly internationally and you need a fly wire, you have to submit a declaration of international operations that sets out, what airport you're leaving from, where you're going to arrive, and date and time. And for the most part, that information is all accurate. It's all submitted in good faith. But it seems like there might be some instances where people are submitting that type of information and it's not necessarily verified. And the FAA is going to be looking into that now. Next slide, please. Okay, we can just skip that slide. I think we've already addressed most of that. Try to catch up a little bit here. So just what are some of the things that we're in? Next slide, please. So there we go. So what's some of the information that we're hearing that's not necessarily official, but we really think it's pretty good information and we've got a pretty good idea that this is the way it's going to work. One of the things that we've been told is that the registry will have 24/7 access now. We're not, again, entirely sure about the specifics of that, but we've been told that you're going to be able to file documents and order documents, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that because I'm not sure how we're going to staff the office to handle those needs, or how what the industry is going to expect in connection with those types of demands. What do you think, Bruce?
Well, I think from a practical standpoint, there's always been the issue of, people involved in transactions from overseas, on the East Coast, Central Time, which, coordinates and with the FAA's hours that they're open, as well as on the West Coast. There's always been that issue of trying to get business done with the hours that the FAA were open, that we were able to get information and access that information and keep things flowing. I also think from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure that lenders that get involved in transactions are going to change their hours for wire transactions, that those are suddenly going to become 24/7. But I know in our office, if business keeps up the way it's been over the last year and a half, we've actually had to look at possibly scheduling having people on shifts just to get the work done, just to have office space. We've filled up our current space because of the volume of business. But again, I think it's a mixed bag on that. The 24/7 type of thing suddenly gets everyone where they're on the clock all the time. And it's a mixed bag. I think there's advantages, but there's disadvantages as well.
Right. Another change, they're going to allow every record and index that you could run at the FAA public documents room, you're going to be able to run outside of the public documents room. So that's going to be a big help for the industry. It's going to be a really big help for us, because we should be able to order those records and indexes. We're not bottlenecked into doing it at the FAA when the FAA is open. So we're kind of looking forward to that as being able to more efficiently process transactions. One of the bigger things too is that we understand that every party that files documents with the FAA, a party to a document, and I believe the actual parties doing the work, like Bruce's company or our law firm, you're going to have an account that's going to be vetted, sort of like, an account on the international registry is what it sounds like, where you have to, pre-apply for the account, provide information. I don't know how much information, but you're going to have to provide information. It's going to be vetted, and then you're going to be approved. And then my understanding is that the law firms and title companies that regularly do the filings can then be assigned, like the aircraft owner can assign the ability to do a transaction or a closing to a closing company, but they're gonna have to create their own account. So that'll be a degree of complication and detail that we're not having to do right now. Next slide, please. We've been told, with big question, what about the confidential information that they're requesting? We've been told, which is what we would think, that it will be confidential. It's not going to be public. We've also been told that, although this is supposed to go live in October, I think October 4 of 2021, I think maybe that's not going to happen, but it is going to be implemented in stages. So there will be certain things that happen in October, this coming October, or maybe not, but whatever is implemented, it'll probably be done in stages. And we're hoping that they'll allow the Oklahoma City community to be involved with, pre-testing these things, so that we can make sure that we're set up and ready to go, and that we're able to smoothly transition into this new system.
Scott, I have one comment on that. Given the anticipated October launch date, we haven't had any interaction with the folks at the registry in terms of anything that they plan, if they're even going to be capable of initiating something on October 5th. We really haven't had any interaction with them or gotten any feedback or a chance to get feedback on anything that's planned at this stage. So it'll be interesting to see, in terms of, as you said, that rollout, whether or not they will get, the biggest users are the 20 or so companies, law firms and title service companies here in Oklahoma City that interact with that system. We're the biggest users of the system. And I don't think there's been a lot of effort at this point to keep us really updated, informed, and again, of the technical aspect of the processes, so that we'll all be ready to go when it happens.
Yeah, Bruce, I would encourage anybody who's joined us today, if they have been contacted or had any interaction, and we'd love to hear about that in order to, see who, if anyone, has been engaged in this transition. So at this point, I think we're going to transition over towards the digital signature area of the presentation.
Okay. We set up a little bit of the history on the FAA's decision to start accepting digital signatures and transactions. It originated in a joint order of the FAA and the DOT back in 2008, when they said that digital signatures are acceptable for federal purposes. They're federally acceptable to utilize those. The registry itself issued its own change bulletin in 2016 saying we will start accepting these. Within about 30 days, they issued some guidance and clarification as to what was going to be required and needed. And since that time, we've been using that. Perhaps one of the biggest issues was a lot of confusion over the distinctions between electronic and digital signatures. Because of the way the FAA set up their own processes, they were unable to ascertain whether or not the documents were being submitted with electronic signatures or digital signatures. And that sort of moves us to our next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Hey, Bruce, sorry to interrupt, Bruce. We just had two quick questions that I wanted to run
Okay.
by you and Scott. The first had to do with user accounts. The question was how they'll work. Will they continue to use escrow agents? Will lawyers, brokers, owners, lien holders, et cetera, have to get their own user account?
Well, again, this is not official, but yes, we understand that the lawyers, brokers, anyone who's doing multiple transactions or assisting on multiple transactions will need their separate account. So the folks at McAfee and Taft, the folks at AIC will have to have their separate account vetted, approved, so that they can get onto this system and help their clients close transactions. And that's in addition to their clients.
Okay.
Yeah, again, well, we don't have all the details and information. We anticipate it's going to be something similar to what the IR does. And today we help and assist our customers in becoming part of the IR, getting on the IR, and then we take over from there and accomplishing their transactions. So I don't know that there'll be any significant changes. It's just that there's just going to be some additional steps to get business done.
Okay. And then the other quick question had to do with when you're dealing with money that needs to be wired, and obviously then you're predicated around Federal Reserve Bank business hours versus the now 24/7, arrangement with the registry.
Well, I think that's a question that needs to be answered by the people in the finance industry as to whether or not they're going to make changes to be able to do 24/7 transactions from that aspect. Because I think that will be one limitation. When there's financing involved, we're going to be subject to their hours.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bruce, if you want to jump backward.
Okay. One of the things I was trying to explain is that there's a lot of confusion surrounding the distinction between digital signatures and electronic signatures. And I think if you refer back to when I said that, the FAA is actually an agency within the DOT. If you think of electronic signatures being the bigger set, and then digital signatures are actually a small subset within the context of electronic signatures. And if you go to the next slide, please. They're really two different things. And electronic signatures are the type of things that you do. And I think we've all done it at one point in time. We've accepted click wrap software where we agree to the terms, we just click a button and accept. Or we perhaps done something where we've agreed to something using a signature that we generated with our Microsoft Office. All of those things are binding signatures. This goes back to the e-sign act back in 2000, which made electronic consent something that could occur and bind people to contracts. It's just the digital signatures are a little bit different from electronic signatures. It actually is a process where a significant amount of information is being captured in the PDF. There's all sorts of hidden algorithms and encryptions that are occurring that give a lot of information. Sometimes it's printed out, the key information is printed out in a summary in terms of who signed in, when they signed in, what IP address they were using, how long they looked at the document, when they actually gave their consent or signed the document, which is called the signing ceremony. All of these things are tracked and they're hidden and incorporated into the digitally signed document, the PDF that contains the digital signature. Another significant thing that's very important is the fact that once a document's signed, if there's any changes that are made to the document, it becomes invalid. So that, for instance, let's say we're dealing with an aircraft purchase agreement. If the purchase price is $1 million, everyone signs it, agrees to it, and someone changes the purchase price to $2 million, it's going to invalidate the document. Kind of a key thing is that when the FAA started their process, is one that requires that the document containing the digital signature be printed and then filed with the FAA. When that happens, all of the protections that are in that document are lost at that point in time. At the time it's printed, you basically don't know, other than if it looks like a digital signature and if it complies with some of the requirements that the FAA set forth as to how these things are supposed to look, the legibility and the information that's supposed to be incorporated. And that's on the next slide, if we can move to that, please. All of these things are required. You can on its face see that from a printed copy, but you can't actually tell whether or not it's actually a digitally signed copy at that point in time, or whether someone used a product to electronically sign the document. But the FAA did provide some guidance and some things that they asked people to do. One of the key things is that the signatures, either have something that shows that it has the software provider seal, watermark, date and time of execution, or have an authentication key or code identifying the software provider. And this became an immediate issue in our industry at the time that rule came forth, unless people actually read that guidance that came out. Because if you put the date and time on the signature, and you then ask your escrow agent to assign or fill in the blanks and date your documents as to the actual closing date, when people want to close the aircraft, they want to transfer liabilities for insurance reasons, for tax reasons, a number of things. The FAA came out with an opinion that it actually occurred, the date is actually the date that's on the digital signature. So one of the industry's solutions was just to eliminate the date and time from the signature page and follow their other guidance that you have the key or the code identifying the software provider, which was an optional thing. And when you do that, they were acceptable by the FAA. If you ever did have to authenticate the information, it was all going to be contained in the encrypted data that was in the original document, not the printed document that was sitting in the FAA office. Scott, I think you have some thoughts on how CARES is going to impact the use of digital signatures.
Right. Yeah. So, as Bruce said, like kind of the short summary of that is just that, the FAA is very clear that they require digital signatures, not electronic signatures. It'd be interesting when Ed provides his, information on kind of the legality of electronic signatures in the United States, whether or not that's really a realistic requirement anymore, that they be digitally executed, and whether it's really needed if we're going to be vetting accounts and setting up accounts for every owner. But that's their position. But the way their system works and the technology that they have currently, there's no way for them to really tell if a document was digitally executed versus electronically executed. So they put together that memo, which is, public. If you don't have it, let us know. We can send you a copy, but of the requirements of what the signature should look like. The interesting thing is, with this new CARES program, they will be, they'll have the technology, just like you do at your office, to open up a document, and the program will tell you if it's been modified or if it was digitally executed, and all those sorts of things. So the FAA will actually have the ability to do that on any PDFs that you email in or submit. And so it will be interesting to see if we really will have to continue to require with these, comply with these more stringent digital signature requirements and really have to comply with them. Or if the system will allow, and the FAA will allow parties to submit the easier, more widely accepted electronic signature format.
Great, Scott and Bruce, thank you for going over that. That was a lot to try to cover in a short period of time. So we want to transition over to Terry now and talk about what their group is, a lending group, how they handled this whole change over to digital signatures and some of the processes they've put in place to manage that process. Terry?
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, a lot of things that lenders need to, of course, consider is the risks involved in accepting digital signatures, but also then what Bruce and Scott have talked about as far as, well, what will the FAA accept and which application then would be appropriate for your bank. DocuSign certainly is a popular application that many people use. PNC does use DocuSign, but we may use or may have the ability to use other programs in the future. And your bank, again, would want to evaluate those types of things. Certainly one of the biggest things for banks is knowing, well, who holds the chattel paper. And so that's what was important to PNC with DocuSign, is that they have an e-vault. And so that e-vault then is what keeps the chattel paper, so that is considered the original. And every other copy then will have a watermark on it indicating that it is a copy. So when determining what application to use, you want to make sure that you understand how that chattel paper is going to be held. Certainly another aspect is the fraud piece of it. And, you want to make sure that your signer is truly signing that document and they haven't, say, passed that on to an assistant, or the wife is signing instead of the husband, or the husband instead of the wife. And so what we do to make sure that we are having that person that we need sign a document, we provide them with a 6-digit access code, and we must give that code to the signer verbally. This certainly can be challenging at times, especially dealing with the high net worth individuals that we work with in our industry. But it's something that, as long as you're setting those expectations up front, and the assistants or CFOs know that we need to be talking with these individuals, that we can, we haven't really had any problems as far as providing the codes and getting the signatures, and again making sure that we're not having somebody else sign who shouldn't be signing. So, it's every lender just needs to go through their vetting process, considering those risks, and making sure that they understand what it is that these software applications provide them. And that's all I've got on that slide.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Ed, do you want to jump in now and get onto the legal side of handling all these documents?
Sure. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to talk about some of the legal issues associated with digital signatures. And the statutory framework that we have for digital signatures is that there's a group of state laws called the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, or UETA. This is a uniform act. The way uniform acts come about is that you get some legal scholars make a determination that we need to have some sort of law that applies across the various states on a particular topic. So they go out, they draft it, they propose it, and put it out there for all the states to consider whether they want to make that part of their law. This is the Uniform Commercial Code is a very good example of this that we're all familiar with. The UETA has been adopted in all but 3 states. Those are New York, Illinois, and Washington. So you've got a very uniform set of rules that govern how digital and electronic signatures will be treated. In addition to that, there's a federal law called the Electronic Signatures and Global National Commerce Act, which is typically called e-sign. And it covers much of the same ground as UETA does. And there's a lot of interplay between the two, and whether one is, whether the federal rules preempt the state rules. The net effect, without getting into the weeds on it, is that the rules for the acceptance and validity of electronic signatures are substantially the same in all 50 states and govern the same way in a federal format as well. So if we flip to the next slide, some of the real world questions that we'll try to address here in the questions at the end are, if you have digital signatures, is it necessary to get backup original signatures? Some of the reluctance of lenders to provide digital releases. What about documents that aren't filed at the FAA? We know what the FAA will and won't accept. Other documents that are ancillary to the filings, for example, a delivery and acceptance certificate, the purchase agreement. How are they addressed? How do we address notary issues? And then I think what is a real issue is the use of standalone signature pages and packets that we've all gotten very accustomed to in a lot of transactions.
Ed, we have one quick question, if I could.
Sure.
The question is, are electronic notary services like notarize.com accepted federally or in all states?
I don't know the answer to that. It really, that issue is not really addressed in either of the uniform statutes. I think that's going to be, a topic for interpretation by the courts. But I suspect that they will find a way to legitimize the use of electronic notaries, because it is becoming more of an accepted practice and a necessity given the world that we're living in right now.
Thank you.
So turning the page over to legal opinions, this is an area of interest, I think, for banks that are requiring opinions on transactions, on their loan transactions. Usually it comes either from in-house counsel of the borrower or from outside counsel to the borrower. And before digital signatures, there was always this group called the Tribar Opinion Committee, and that is a group of various bar associations around the country that have all gotten together to kind of come up with a playbook and ground rules for what legal opinions should include, can't include. What are the rules for opinions? What assumptions can lawyers make? What assumptions are automatically in an opinion, even if it's not stated? The Tribar Opinion Committee recently came out with a statement on the treatment of UITA and e-sign. And the bottom line is they said that electronic signatures on deal documents are valid. So if you're doing an opinion based on an electronically signed document, you can treat that signature as valid. And docs signed with electronic signatures have legal effect. So basically what they're saying is that from an opinion perspective, an e-signed document is every bit as valid as a manually signed document. E-signed contracts, the Tribar opinion says that if you're looking at one and you see that the document is signed electronically, the lawyer can make the assumption that there's an implied agreement by the parties that electronic signatures on the documents are valid. So you don't have to check to see if there's been any specific opting in to an electronic signature regimen. Going to the next page, making one of the opinions that lawyers are typically asked to make is the document duly executed? And that can, and for the purposes of this, e-signatures would include emails, PDFs, faxes, and what we're talking about more today, DocuSign, Adobe, and other third-party provider basis for e-signatures. So the duly executed opinion can be based on the assumption that it's based on the party's conduct. So if the parties have electronically signed, lawyers can assume that that's what they intended to do. The contract doesn't need to explicitly state that it authorizes e-signatures, although that could be a better practice for banks and other parties to transactions to include in their contract language going forward. But the opinion giver really should review the document, and as should the parties to the document, to make sure that the contract doesn't explicitly exclude or prohibit e-signatures. So you can, unless you see something to the contrary, you can assume that an e-signed contract is duly executed. The general rule is that an opinion may be based on the assumption that the signatures are valid, and that assumption is the same for a manually signed or an e-signed document. So again, from a legal opinion perspective, it doesn't make any difference. The assumptions are the same for manual signed documents or for electronically signed documents. Moving to the next page, enforcement. I've broken this down into internal issues, which the internal issues are kind of the things that we all deal with, the normative behavior that we engage in, and we've all gotten so accustomed to in closing transactions through the law firms and title companies in Oklahoma City. And then the external issues, which are, how would a court look at it? How would a third party look at what we've just done? We've already talked about what the FAA will accept. The bottom line is that digital signatures are okay. So the registry is going to accept them. There's still some open questions about digital versus electronic, and a lot of things that are going to be going to shake out during the CARES Act implementation. But for now, we know that digital signatures are okay. Our normative behavior has, in a lot of transactions, what we see is signature packets being sent out. And rather than sending out the entire document to be executed, the lender or lender's counsel will put together a packet of all the signature pages. It makes it easier for the signer to just go through a packet, sign every page. They don't have to flip through 30 pages of a loan document to get to where they need to be to sign. Makes things a lot easier. And then what we normally do is we take that signature page, we have, Scott's firm or Bruce's firm, attach it to the body of the document, and that's what gets submitted to the FAA. We authorize them during the closing to date it. There may be some blanks in the document at that point that need to be completed, or serial numbers that need to be corrected. We've all gotten used to doing that. and it makes it easier to do deals. So yeah, that's the way it is. So from a best practices perspective, I think it's a good idea to address the acceptance and validity of e-signatures in the documents. We should have some methodology for validating the completion of the documents in Oklahoma City, and some sort of methodology for the exchange of final documents post-closing. Is there an opportunity to comment or object? When do we know that the documents that are filed have actually been the ones that have been agreed to? And a lot of this behavior takes place during the closing call, but it's all verbal at that point. And do we need to formalize that? Flipping to the next page on enforcement from an external perspective, there's not a lot of law out there on how courts interpret e-signed documents. And one area that I find to be potentially very troubling is this whole concept of signature pages that are being affixed to the body of a document. How is the court going to view that? Are they going to just accept the fact that everybody agreed that that's what they were going to do? How are they going to view dating and completion and correction of documents? We've left it open for courts to interpret, and there's some potential pitfalls there. Question of forgeries. I can't figure out how somebody could forge an e-document, but I'm sure there are hackers out there that are far more technically proficient than I that will figure out a way to do it. Terry mentioned that they send a 6-digit verification code. I think that's a great idea. We all see that in other aspects of our life. You order something online, before it gets accepted, you get a text message that says, "Hey, is this really you?" That's something that we should all think about to cut down on the possibility of forgeries. Or, as Terry mentioned before, the administrative assistant is signing for the executive, or the wife or husband is signing for the other person. So it's something we should think about. International deals, we all know what the law is in the US. These signatures are pretty readily accepted. On an international deal, I don't know that we can just assume that. All the more reason to put some language in your documents to address that situation. Going to the next page, in doing some research on this, one of my colleagues at the firm sent me a copy of the Mergers and Acquisitions Committee of the American Bar Association. Has actually come up with a set of rules and guidelines for acceptance of digital signatures. And because we're running a little short on time, I won't go through what those are, but I would propose that maybe the aviation community, and particularly this branch of the aviation community being the finance side of things, ought to explore, coming up with a set of rules that you could basically opt into with your document that says, we are acknowledging that these rules are governing the execution and filing and enforcement of documents going forward. So we take some of that potential for interpretation that we may not like out of the process. We'll flip to the next page, and I think we want to just kind of open this up in terms of what people think about changes to normative behavior, and situations where one party accepts digital signatures and the other one doesn't. So.
Great, thanks, Ed. As you said, we are sort of coming up to the end of our time. So I want to thank Terry, Ed, Scott, and Bruce. There was a lot to cover. Certainly, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email them in to any of the participants, or even to Karen or Tracy at NAFA, and we can certainly get back to them. So Tracy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for attending and participating. There's a lot of information here. So as Lee said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to, you can reach out to me, but I don't really probably know some of these panelists would be a better option for reaching out to. So thank you for participating.